I never saw it coming. One email, one photo, was all it took to shatter 15 years of marriage. But the truth I uncovered? It was so much worse than I ever imagined. Well, that hit like a freight train. I stumbled backward, the drink slipping from my hands and crashing to the floor. My vision blurred for a second, my head reeling from the impact. My left hand shot up to my face, pressing against the growing ache on my jaw. Had she dislocated it? It sure felt like it. Every time I opened and closed my mouth there was a sharp click, a deep, grinding pain that made me wince. I barely had time to register the embarrassment creeping up my spine before I realized the entire room had gone silent. All eyes were on me. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, it had all stopped. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look back at my wife. Bridget's eyes were burning with rage, fury, something dark and untamed. But I couldn't understand it. Just 10 minutes ago we had been laughing, mingling, celebrating. This was the company's 30th anniversary party, a huge milestone. When I say my company, I don't mean I own it. But I might as well. I've been here for 25 years, climbing my way up from the bottom. Now, I'm the director of operations, the right-hand man to the owner himself. It had been a decade since our last company party. 10 years ago, when we celebrated the 20th anniversary, my life was in a very different place. Back then, I wasn't even sure if I'd still be here in another month, let alone another decade. Not because of work. The company was solid. It was my marriage that had me wondering where my life was headed. I still remember that day. The moment everything changed. I had just received an anonymous email. It was addressed to me but also to someone named Elizabeth Jones. The sender? Someone from Bridget's corporate office. My stomach tightened as I stared at it, confusion twisting in my gut. Why was I getting an email from my wife's workplace? I clicked it open. And just like that, my life split into before and after. A photo. A single, undeniable image. My wife locked in a deep, passionate kiss with another man. They stood in front of a hotel room door, their bodies pressed together, lost in each other. I remember every single detail, the rich blue of Bridget's business dress, the way her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. This wasn't some accidental snapshot, some misleading moment frozen in time. This was intimacy. Desire. Betrayal. His hand gripped her hip, his other arm wrapped around her back, holding her like she belonged to him. The door behind them framed the scene like a cruel painting. And the worst part? The room number was clear as day. 321. And I knew for certain, that wasn't my wife's room. I checked the hotel records and there it was, Gary Jones. Room 321 had been reserved in his name. But the real gut punch? When I tried to find out if my wife had a room of her own, there was nothing. No reservation. No record. Nothing at all. I'd get more details later, but in that moment I needed air. I needed space. My mind was spinning, my stomach was in knots, and I couldn't process what I had just seen. I walked straight into Jim's office, the owner of the company, my boss for the past 25 years, and asked if I could take the rest of the day off. Maybe even the next day too. Jim took one look at me and knew something was wrong. He didn't ask though. Not then. He just nodded, gave me a pat on the shoulder, and told me to take whatever time I needed. I drove home in a daze, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I got there, I did the only thing that made sense. I packed up the kids and took them to Bridget's parents' house. I didn't want them anywhere near the storm that was about to hit. They didn't deserve to hear the words I knew I was going to say tonight. Bridget came home around 6:30 that evening. Her flight had landed at 5:15, and after picking up her car from long-term parking, she made the 45-minute drive home like nothing had changed. Business as usual. She worked as an area rep for a company out of Chicago, which meant she spent most of her time working from home. It was perfect for balancing work and the kids, but once every quarter she had to attend a 3-day corporate meeting at the headquarters. This was supposed to be one of those trips. As she walked in through the garage door, I could hear the usual shuffle of her bags, the jingling of her keys. But before she could even say a word, before she could lie to my face, I stormed past her, grabbed my truck keys and yanked open the garage door. She called after me, but I didn't care. I revved the engine, drowning out whatever pathetic excuse she was about to throw my way. The second I slammed the truck into reverse, she jumped back, startled. I didn't hesitate. I peeled out of the garage, backed into the street, threw it into drive and floored it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Did she really think she was going to talk her way out of this? That she could flash those big innocent eyes and spin some ridiculous story that would make me forget what I had seen? No chance. Just then my phone rang. Of course it was her. I clenched it in my hand, debating whether to answer or roll down the window and toss it into the street. But I needed it. Not for her. Not for whatever she had to say. But because I had no idea where I was going, I just knew I needed to be anywhere but there. The worst part? There had been no signs. No drop in intimacy. No distance between us. If anything, our marriage was as passionate as ever. Even 15 years in, we were still together 5 times a week. More than most couples our age. She hadn't pulled away, hadn't seemed distracted, hadn't started suggesting anything new or strange in the bedroom. But then again, we had always been adventurous, so it wouldn't have stood out anyway. If you had asked me 2 days ago, I would have told you I was the luckiest man in the world. And now, I didn't even know who I was married to. I had done everything I thought a good husband and father should do. I was present, involved, and always tried to put my family first. I made sure Bridget felt loved, surprising her with flowers, not just for special occasions but just because. I listened to her, supported her, and in the bedroom I always put her needs first. So where had I gone wrong? That question gnawed at me, but I knew I wouldn't find the answer tonight. Not without talking to Bridget, and I wasn't ready for that. The wound was too raw, the betrayal too fresh. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. I didn't know when I'd be able to face her, but it definitely wasn't tonight. As those thoughts swirled in my head, I realized I wasn't going to sleep. My mind was too restless, too full of unanswered questions. Lying in bed was pointless, so I got up, took a long shower, and threw on some fresh clothes. When I turned my phone back on, the screen lit up with missed calls, voicemails, and texts, all from Bridget. She was worried, asking where I was, if I was okay. I wasn't ready to deal with that yet. I ignored the notifications, pretending I hadn't seen them, and instead decided to get breakfast. Cracker Barrel sounded good. I sat alone in a corner booth, my coffee growing cold as I absent-mindedly watched the other patrons. Families with young kids, laughing and enjoying their morning together. Parents helping their toddlers eat, smiling at their messy faces. Just another ordinary morning for them. But for me? My life had cracked wide open, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel normal again. After breakfast, I stopped for gas, and once again my phone was flooded with messages. The tone of them had changed. She was worried. I could tell from the way her messages piled up that she thought I might have done something drastic. I knew I needed to let her know I was alive. But I also didn't want her thinking I had read or listened to her messages. It was better for her to believe I had deleted them all, unread. That I didn't care what she had to say. Instead of calling her, I called JJ. We had gotten him a phone for his 12th birthday, and right now he was the only person I wanted to hear from. I dialed JJ's number, and he picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hey Dad. What's going on?" His voice was casual, but I could hear the curiosity underneath. "Why do you ask?" I replied, trying to keep my tone even. "Well, Mom's acting weird. She took all your clothes out of the closet, and I saw your wedding ring sitting on her nightstand." I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my face. "So she noticed." "Sounds like you described it perfectly," I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Why do you need me to tell you what it is?" I didn't use sarcasm often with Bridget, but when I did, she knew I was angry. "Kurt, we need to talk about this," she said suddenly, her voice coming through on the other line. She must have taken the phone from JJ. I clenched my jaw. Of course she wanted to talk now. "You don't have to go off half-ed," she added. I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, so that's what this is? You're afraid I'm overreacting?" My voice was sharp now. "Or maybe it's because he's got something I don't? Is that what you see in him?" Bridget sighed heavily. "Kurt, stop it. Please. If it helps for you to say everything you need to say, fine. I'll listen." "All right, then listen carefully." My voice was steady, but inside I felt like I was coming apart. "Your wife, my wife, the mother of my kids, your daughter for that matter, has been having an affair." The other end of the line was silent. "Kurt, I can't believe that," my mother-in-law finally said, her voice shaking. Well, I didn't believe it either. Until I got an email. With pictures. I swallowed hard. One of them showed her in a passionate kiss outside a hotel room door. Another silence. "Then, there has to be a logical explanation," she said weakly. I closed my eyes, trying to stay calm. That's what I thought too. So I called the hotel. Asked if she had a room there. And? "She didn't," I said flatly. "No reservation under her name." That part had really thrown me at first. But now I knew better. Bridget hadn't just cheated. She had gone to great lengths to cover it up. The secrecy, the planning. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. "Kurt," her mother said again, "I just can't believe it." "I know," I muttered. I couldn't believe it either. But here we are. And now I had to figure out what came next. Because as much as it sickened me, I needed to know. Was she in love with Gary Jones? Was this just some fling? Or was she looking to rekindle something serious? And if she was, where did that leave me? Where did that leave our kids? The next day, I texted Bridget, "I'll stop by the house tomorrow night around 6 o'clock. That was it. No pleasantries, no explanations, just a statement. She texted back almost immediately. "Okay. I love you." I stared at the message, my grip tightening around my phone. Love me? After everything she loved me? Rather than offering a shred of remorse, she had to throw in that line, like it would undo everything. Like it would make me forget what she had done. It wasn't an apology. It was an insult. And that got my blood boiling. The next evening, I walked into the house and went straight to the point. "So how long have you and Gary been involved with each other?" I asked, my voice calm, measured. Bridget's face paled. "Kurt, it's not what you think." I crossed my arms. "So you're telling me it's not true? That you haven't been seeing your ex-boyfriend?" She looked down at her hands, then slowly lifted her gaze back to mine. "It's not like that," she said again. I took a deep breath. "Bridget, you've always been an incredibly honest person. So I want you to look me in the eyes and give me a yes or no answer." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no either. And that told me everything. Later that week, I met with an attorney. I had already played out the worst-case scenario in my mind, but hearing it from a professional made it all feel real. "Because you're the primary earner," she explained, "you'll likely be responsible for child support. However, since Bridget has health insurance through her job, you probably won't have to pay spousal support." I let out a bitter laugh. What a kick in the teeth. She cheats. She betrays me. And yet I'm the one who has to pay for it? The attorney gave me a knowing look. "Knowing all of this, do you still want to have her served?" I sat there for a moment, staring at the papers in front of me. Then, without hesitation, I said, "I'd rather live in a dump than stay married to her." She nodded. "May I make a suggestion?" "Sure. You're the expert." After the initial shock of being served, she may be open to counseling. I almost laughed at the thought. Counseling? After this? But then she added, "If you're willing to go, you might at least get some clarity, whether it's for closure or for reconciliation." I exhaled, rubbing my temples. "Fine. But you pick the counselor. You know my schedule, set it up and let me know where and when." She nodded and pulled out her phone. "I'll make a call right now." Just before I walked out the door, Bridget grabbed my hand. "Kurt, thank you. I truly do love you." I clenched my jaw, my stomach twisting. "I love you too, honey." But love wasn't enough. Here we were, either on the brink of reconciliation or complete collapse. And for the first time in my life, I truly didn't know which way it would go. What was I willing to accept? What was I willing to do? And more importantly, what about my kids? If they were even mine. I hated even thinking that way, questioning if my own children were really mine. But when someone betrays you, when the foundation of your marriage crumbles in an instant, everything becomes uncertain. Trust is no longer automatic. That night, I lay in a stiff motel bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying our life together over and over. I couldn't make sense of it. There was nothing, no sign, no warning, that had prepared me for this. I had thought our marriage was solid. Happy even. But clearly I had been blind. Sleep barely came that weekend. My mind wouldn't shut off, and when Monday morning rolled around, I felt like a shell of myself. That's when Jim, my boss, stopped by my office. "Can I take you to lunch?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes full of concern. I hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Sure. I'll drop by around 11:45. We'll go to Southern Tray Steakhouse." "Sounds good," I replied. But I knew this wasn't just about lunch. Jim had seen it, I wasn't myself. My home problems were bleeding into my work, and no matter how much I tried to bury them, it was obvious. At the restaurant, Jim didn't beat around the bush. "I know something's going on, Kurt. I don't need to pry, but I've been around long enough to recognize a man who's got the weight of the world on his shoulders." I sighed, swirling the ice in my glass. "Marriage problems." Jim nodded slowly like he already knew. "Let me tell you something," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I've been married twice. My first wife? She made me the happiest man in the world. We just worked. Then she passed away. My second wife." He shook his head. "A mistake. I kept wanting her to be like my first wife and she just couldn't be. I set expectations she was never going to meet. So here I am, pushing 50, going home to an empty house because I keep searching for someone just like my first wife, and never finding her. I sat with that for a moment, letting his words settle. Jim exhaled and fixed me with a serious look. Don't walk away from your marriage only to spend the rest of your life trying to replace her. He stared off into the distance, his voice heavy with regret. Trust me. It's not the answer you think it is. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure if that advice fit my situation, but I nodded anyway. Thanks, Jim. That night, I found myself back at the counseling office, waiting in the lobby. If I wanted to be productive at work, if I wanted to think straight again, I needed clarity. I arrived early and sat on the small love seat in the waiting area, my leg bouncing impatiently. A couple of minutes later, Bridget walked in. She smiled at me. And for a second, just a fleeting second, I felt that familiar pull. I had loved that smile for so many years. It used to make my day, used to reassure me that everything was okay. But now I didn't know what to feel. She took a seat in a chair across from me instead of next to me on the love seat. I wasn't sure if she was trying to be respectful of my space, or if she felt the distance between us. Either way, it was there. A few moments later, the counselor stepped out of her office. Kurt, Bridget? You can come in now. And just like that, we were about to find out if there was anything left to save. I sighed and nodded, signaling for Bridget to continue. She took a breath and steadied herself. Kurt, the man in the picture, as you know, was my high school sweetheart. I already knew that part. We were in love, she went on, her voice carrying that faraway tone people get when they talk about the past. We tried to make a long-distance relationship work during college, but by the end of our first year, we both knew it wouldn't last. So we broke up before heading back for our sophomore year. I think we were both heartbroken. The counselor leaned forward slightly. That was close to 20 years ago. What happened to lead us to this point? Bridget exhaled, glancing at her hands before looking back up. Gary couldn't make his marriage work, she admitted. He reached out to me a couple of years ago, just as a friend, to reconnect. At first, it was just the occasional message catching up. But over time we started talking more. I clenched my jaw. More? How much more? Her voice wavered slightly. We've been meeting up every 3 months for the last 2 years. I felt my stomach turn. And has he been intimate with you? I forced out. Bridget shook her head. No. We haven't crossed that line. I let out a bitter laugh. So you're telling me that for 2 years, you've been sneaking around meeting up with your ex, but it's okay because you didn't sleep with him? Bridget stiffened. We've just been sharing meaningful moments together. That's even worse. My voice was cold. So tell me, Bridget, do you have feelings for him? Her eyes darted away for a moment before she answered. Kurt, he was my first love. We had a deep connection and we promised to support each other whenever we could. I scoffed. So supporting each other means lying to me? Sneaking off to see him? That's your definition of support? Her face tightened in frustration. Kurt, it took nothing from you. Did you not feel love before I went to my meetings? Did we not make love like we always did? I shook my head. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about what you did or didn't do physically with him. It's the emotional betrayal. The fact that you were giving him a part of you that was supposed to be mine. Silence filled the room. Needless to say, I didn't move back home that week. I called the kids every night though. I made sure to use Bridget's phone. There was no point in intentionally making things worse by avoiding her number. When she answered, I was cordial, but I never lingered in conversation. I spoke to the kids, asked about their day, told them I loved them. Then, I'd hang up before Bridget had the chance to pull me into anything more. By the time the next Wednesday rolled around, we were back in the counselor's office, waiting for our session. I had spent a lot of time going over my thoughts, making a list of everything I needed to say. The past week had been a brutal mental exercise, questioning what was salvageable, what was too broken to fix. The counselor turned to me. Kurt, do you believe that respect is the foundation of a healthy relationship? I nodded. Of course. If a person doesn't respect their partner, everything else starts to crumble. Trust, intimacy, everything. Do you think Bridget respects you? I hesitated. She always has, except for the other day when she spoke to me like I was one of the kids, demanding that I come home this instant. I turned my gaze to Bridget. Her face was flushed red, and for the first time since all of this started, I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. I wasn't sure if Bridget's red face was from embarrassment or anger. But either way, it didn't change the facts. The counselor cleared her throat. So, Kurt, in the over 15 years you've been together, would you say Bridget has almost always shown you respect? I sighed and nodded. Yes, she has. I glanced at Bridget out of the corner of my eye. Her head was down. All right, the counselor continued. What's next? Good communication, I answered. Do you two talk openly? I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. Honestly, I think that's always been one of our strongest points. We've always been able to talk about anything. That's what makes this so painful. Bridget shifted uncomfortably. I turned to her. You didn't talk to me about what you were feeling. You didn't tell me you were struggling. You never gave me a chance to be there for you. Her head remained down, eyes fixed on the floor. The counselor made a note. We'll come back to that later. What's next? Selflessness, I said. And what do you mean by that? That in a marriage you put your partner's needs on equal footing with your own. That you don't make choices that only serve yourself, especially not when they risk hurting the person you claim to love. The counselor nodded. That's a fair expectation. So, with all that said, let me remind you that this process is about trying to save your marriage. If that's still your goal, we need to address a key issue. She turned to Bridget. Bridget, I've heard you say you want understanding and forgiveness. But I have yet to hear you ask for it. Bridget's head dipped even lower. I knew you were going to ask me that at some point, she murmured. And I've been struggling with the answer. Slowly, she lifted her head, her eyes locking with mine. I saw the tears brimming there, threatening to spill over. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry that what I did hurt you. I'm sorry that I damaged our relationship. A lump formed in my throat, but I stayed silent. Then she took a deep breath. But I'm not sorry for what I did. The room went still. I was fulfilling something I needed. And just like that, something inside me snapped. Later that night, I sat in my truck, staring at my phone. I had a name now. Elizabeth Jones. She had been copied on that email, the same one that had shattered my world. And now I needed to know why. I scrolled through my contacts until I found her number and pressed call. A few rings later, a hesitant voice answered. This is Liz. You asked me to call? Yeah, I said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I just wanted to talk. Maybe fill in some gaps that I have, and hopefully fill in some gaps you may have. There was a pause on the other end. Then finally, okay. Liz sighed on the other end of the line. I don't know how much you already know, she said, so I'll just tell you everything I do. She laid it all out. Everything she had pieced together. Bridget had told Gary she was there for him because he was struggling with intimacy issues. That he needed her. I scoffed. Intimacy issues? If anything, Bridget and I had the opposite problem. The only issue we had in the bedroom was that she sometimes complained that all I ever wanted was a quick, no-frills experience. That I wasn't as thoughtful as I used to be. But even if that were true, was that really her excuse? To step outside of our marriage? I ran a hand down my face, frustration bubbling over. Liz, let me ask you something. My voice was measured, controlled. Did Bridget ever, I don't know, did she ever make it sound like what she was doing wasn't wrong? Liz hesitated before answering. Yeah, she admitted. She justified it. Said it wasn't taking anything away from you. I let out a bitter laugh. That's exactly what she told me. That phone call did something I hadn't expected. It gave me hope. Not hope for saving my marriage, but hope for getting out of this mess cleanly. Maybe hearing it from Liz, seeing how insane her reasoning sounded coming from someone else, would be Bridget's wake-up call. Maybe this would be her moment of clarity. Would she finally see what she had done? Would she finally understand that she had broken something between us? As I sat in my truck after the call, I thought about why I had agreed to counseling in the first place. It had only been 2 weeks and I already had most of the answers I needed. What? Does she regret it? Can this be fixed? The why was clear. Bridget had convinced herself she was doing nothing wrong. The regret? Not really. She was sorry I was hurt, but not sorry for what she had done. And as for fixing this? That was still up in the air. The counselor had mentioned something interesting in our last session. People process betrayal differently, she had said. Some are able to forgive because they can view it as a mental lapse, a mistake. But others? They need to see it as a mental defect, something outside of the person's control. It makes it easier to understand. And easier to forgive. I had thought about that a lot since then. If Bridget's way of thinking, her rationalizing this, was the result of something deeper, would that change how I saw it? Would that make it easier to let go of the anger? Would it make it easier to stay? Or was I just looking for a reason to walk away without guilt? I still didn't know. But I was starting to realize that maybe I didn't need to. I knew that Mary, the counselor, probably had some qualms about discussing Bridget outside of our private sessions. But her primary goal was to save our marriage. And if sharing certain insights with us could make reconciliation easier, then she would do it. I had told her before that Bridget's attitude frustrated me the most. Not just the betrayal itself but the way she justified it. The way she acted like it didn't take anything away from me. Like it was harmless. Mary had asked me a tough question the last time we spoke. Kurt, if you divorce her, will you always be looking for a replacement? Someone just like her? I hadn't known how to answer that. At work, I had managed to compartmentalize everything. My personal life wasn't crippling my performance, but I definitely wasn't myself either. By Wednesday night, I found myself back in the counselor's office at 7:15. My nerves were shot. I felt like some kid waiting for a prom date, anxious, unsure if the night would go well or completely fall apart. I really hoped the plan worked. At 7:25, Bridget walked in. I could tell she had put in extra effort. She looked polished, put together. Not overly done up, but just nice enough that it felt intentional. Like she wanted to present herself well. I sat on the love seat. She sat in the chair across from me. I wasn't sure if she was keeping her distance out of respect or if she felt the space between us just as much as I did. Kurt, she said, her voice softer than usual, I want to do this differently. I want us to be able to share everything. Your fears, my fears, let's talk about them. Let me in on yours and I'll let you in on mine. We've always communicated well, but I feel like we need more, especially now. That way we can truly understand each other. It sounded good. It sounded like what I wanted to hear. And then, right in that moment, my phone rang. Bridget's expression immediately shifted. Annoyance flickered across her face. Seriously, Kurt? She said, exasperated. I held up a finger and answered, putting the call on speaker but muting our session so the sound wouldn't carry. A woman's voice came through the line, panicked. Kurt, what are you doing? We need to talk. Bridget's face darkened. We're in the middle of something, she snapped. But the woman's next words sent a chill through my spine. Would you please just listen? Her voice was shaking. She told me that unless I slept with her, she was going to tell you that we've been having an affair this whole time. Bridget's eyes widened. I didn't want to do it, the woman on the phone continued, her voice almost breaking. I told her I loved you. I told her she should find one of the other unmarried reps if she wanted to have an affair. But Kurt, you have to believe me. The room fell silent. I slowly looked up at Bridget. Her face had gone pale. I didn't want to do it. I have no feelings for her. That's why I broke it off when we were in college. The voice on the phone was filled with frustration and exhaustion. I just wish she would let me be and let me do my job when I'm at those meetings, she continued. Bridget was silent, staring at the phone, her expression unreadable. Was this it? Was this the moment the house of cards finally collapsed? I sat there trying to piece everything together. Bridget had always been honest, at least I thought she had. If I had to believe anything, I had to believe that. She wasn't lying when she said she was trying to help someone she once loved. In her mind, she had framed it as fulfilling an old promise. That was her justification. And it disgusted me. I let out a slow breath and turned to her. So where do we go from here, Bridget? She looked at me, eyes wet, voice shaking. Kurt, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I hurt you. I'm sorry that I took your love for granted. I'm sorry that I put my past promises ahead of our marriage. I studied her face. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing true remorse. Not just regret that she got caught, but real, deep regret. Okay, I said finally. I accept that. Her shoulders slumped slightly in relief. But one more thing, I continued. In order for me to trust you again, I want you to quit your job. Bridget's head snapped up, her mouth opening as if to protest. But before she could speak, Mary, the counselor, held up a hand. Can I interject? She asked. I hesitated but nodded, unsure of what she was thinking. Do you have a dog, Kurt? The question caught me off guard. Yeah. Is it an indoor or outdoor dog? I frowned, still confused. Mostly an indoor dog, but of course, we let her out occasionally. Mary nodded. So, when she goes outside, do you just let her roam completely free or do you keep an eye on her? Well, we keep an eye on her, I admitted. We make sure she's safe. Exactly, Mary said. You trust your dog, but you also supervise. Trust doesn't mean throwing away all boundaries, it means creating a structure where both people feel safe and secure. Bridget shifted in her chair, thinking. I exhaled. I'm not saying you have to quit today, but I need to know that you're willing to put us before that job. Because if it's more important to you than our marriage, then we both know where this is heading. Bridget swallowed hard. I understand. That night I returned from the motel, my mind still racing. Bridget was waiting for me. She had changed into something romantic. It was clear what she wanted. And truth be told, after weeks without intimacy, I wanted it too. We moved toward each other, and for a moment, it felt like we could put everything aside. Just for the night. Just for a few stolen hours. But then, as I reached for the box of condoms, she reacted strongly. I froze. Her body language, the way her eyes widened in something close to panic, it was enough to send another wave of doubt crashing through me. Something wasn't right. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure if I wanted the answers. It's either these or we wait until you get the test results back. It's your choice. Bridget hesitated but eventually agreed. A week later, when the results came back negative, we finally let go. It had been weeks of tension, of uncertainty, but that night, we lost ourselves in each other, long, passionate, desperate. For a brief moment, it felt like things might be okay. But that feeling didn't last. A few weeks later, I noticed something had shifted again. The connection between us, the real connection, wasn't what it used to be. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. Something else was off. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I finally asked, "Bridget, is everything okay?" She glanced at me, her brow furrowed. "Okay how?" "Between us." She sighed, setting her book down. "Kurt, I love you. I love you now just like I always have." "What? What's going on?" I hesitated. "We just don't seem to be connecting like we used to." She studied me, and I swear in that moment she could read my mind. "This is about sex, isn't it?" I rubbed my face and finally nodded. "Yes." "Kurt, you know we're not 20 anymore. My body is going through changes. I just don't have the desire like I used to." I wanted to believe that was all it was. That age, stress, and life had caught up with us. But a nagging voice in my head told me there was more to it. It wasn't long after that when I started spending Monday nights at a local bar, just to watch the game. It was easier than sitting at home in silence. One Monday, as I was watching the game, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Hey Kurt, it's nice to see someone I know hanging out here. Mind if I join you?" I turned to see Terry, a coworker. "Sure, have a seat," I replied. We spent the night watching the game, talking, and booing the refs like any two guys at a sports bar would. When I got home, Bridget was waiting for me. "How was the game?" she asked. "Good," I said. In fact, Terry from work saw me there and joined me. We talked, watched the game, it was a good time. Bridget didn't say much after that, but something about the way she reacted stuck with me. The following Monday, I went back to the bar. And just like before, Terry showed up. We started making it a routine. Then one night, Bridget asked me outright, "So, she was at the bar again?" "She," I repeated, confused. "Terry. You do realize that's short for Terry, right?" I blinked, realization dawning on me. "So, she was out at a bar looking for companionship?" Bridget said flatly. "No," I answered, shaking my head. "She just wanted someone to talk to and watch the games with." Bridget crossed her arms. "And now you're watching the games where, exactly?" I hesitated. "At her house." Bridget let out a bitter laugh. "I see." "Bridget, it wasn't like that. We didn't sleep together." "Not right away, I bet," she shot back. I swallowed hard. She wasn't wrong. It started simple, just two people watching football, talking, finding comfort in something familiar. But then, about a month in, something changed. That night, Terry had disappeared into the bathroom for a few minutes. When she came out, she leaned against the doorway looking at me carefully. "Kurt, can I ask a favor?" At the time, I thought she needed something fixed. A clogged sink, a leaky toilet, something around the house. So I casually replied, "Sure. Is your toilet?" But before I could finish, she stepped closer. "No," she murmured. "Not that kind of favor." And that was the moment everything blurred. Back in the counselor's office, I found myself gripping the arms of my chair as Mary looked between us. "You two are at a crossroads," she said firmly. "And before you move forward, there's something important you both need to understand." Bridget and I exchanged wary glances. "You both have said you're sorry for hurting each other," Mary continued. "But neither of you have admitted to being sorry for what you did." The room fell silent. "Until you both acknowledge that what you did was wrong, not just the hurt it caused, you will never be able to move past this." She let the words sink in. "Now, I have some homework for you."